IMHO Talk Show. We have a young lady with us to kick off this first hour, kick off this first segment. I'm just so delighted that she obliged our invitation and she is joining us right about now. Yes, indeed. So proud of the work that she is doing, and I know the listeners have heard some of the names of her many brands. She has a diversified portfolio, as they say. I'm talking about none other than Lisa Woolfolk, the queen of Black Women Stitch. Lisa, how you doing today?
Good afternoon. Thank y'all so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. And it has been a long time coming. I was like, well, I got to come all the way up to Boston to get an invite. But okay, friends.
We're sorry about that, but we got you now. We got you.
Listen, no, I'm great. No complaints whatsoever. I am so great. You say God's timing is always perfect. So this is as it should be.
There you go. There you go. And so, Lisa, for those that don't know, we're gonna get the full story from you. You know, your history, what inspired you, what got you in to all that Black Women Stitch is all about. But for those who may not know, Black Women Stitch is the sewing group where Black lives matter, centering women, girls, and femmes in sewing while promoting the principles of Black liberation, radical self-love, and social justice. And she does that through so many avenues, as I said, Max, podcasts, and I know different social groups, but like the way that she names these things though is just like it's so funny, but it's so poignant and it makes sense though. Like her podcast, is called Stitch Please. And if I'm not mistaken, she has what is it? You have a book coming out called Stitch Better Have My Money. Did I get that right, Lisa?
Stitch Better Have My Money is our fundraiser. So
the fundraiser.
Stitch Better, ETA, even better. StitchBetterHaveMyMoney.org is the name of our fundraiser. Just to kind of say, hey, hashtag Pay Black Women. We know how we lag behind in terms of payment. And once I realized that my grandmother, who was born in 1913, spent her entire career going through white folks' back doors, I was like, you know what? Y'all need to run me my money and hers. So, please, yes, please.
Very creative. I like it.
Yes, indeed. So Lisa, tell us the sort of the origin stories, because everything that you do, right, is with your outreach of uplifting Black lives, in particular of Black women, it's through stitching. That's like the foundation, right? So how did it come to be that was the avenue that that you found that passion for, to do such great activism, really, and to do such great empowerment?
That's such a beautiful question. I thank you for the opportunity to share the story. It is very much a Charlottesville story. And like many people in our community during the years of 2016 and 2017, led in many ways by the work of Ziona Bryant and other organizers to remove our Confederate War, our Civil War participation trophies from public space. And I was very active in that. It just felt outrageous to me that our public dollars were going to support tokens of white supremacists, a failed white supremacist republic. And so I had done a lot of organizing in that summer of hate, as it's been called, including working with the Bail Fund for activists, sewing for a creative arts team, teaching, all of as much as I could do to show my displeasure. And it was more than just being offended. It was being outraged that this type of idea was still so active and present in what I considered, a modern current time. The idea that the Klan was still marching and still trying to intimidate and still trying to purport this false illusion of white supremacy. It's fine. Y'all go ahead and believe it, but you're never going to convince me. So I was very active during that time. And on the day of August 11th, I was interviewing with Cornel West for an article about the rise of fascism. And that's when the white supremacists had marched on the grounds of UVA, attacking community members and students that had gathered there. And then the next day, you might recall, is when the largest white supremacist rally of the time had taken place. And it ended up being called a state of emergency, and the white supremacists were meant to be expelled. And I believe in an outrage that had happened, a white supremacist drove his car down. It's hard for you to remember all those details, though I have them etched in my brain forever, down the street and murdered Heather Heyer and injured dozens and dozens of other people. And I was standing there at the intersection when the car came through. And so it was just a horrible, shocking time for many people. And some folks are still dealing with the fallout from that catastrophe. But I decided, against my now better judgment, to go to a quilt retreat. There was a quilt retreat outside of town that I had been going to for 15 years. And when my father died, unexpectedly, I was there at that retreat, and those women made me a quilt. They were very, I thought I was in community with them until I arrived after the events of August 11th and 12th. And that is when it became clear to me that the community, that white quilting community that I thought I was a part of, I was actually just being tolerated as long as I could behave in a way that felt palatable to them.
And what gave you that revelation?
Yeah.
That's so when I arrived, I had been working you get assigned into these small tables. There's like 18 tables, 2 people sit at a table. And I had a table mate that I had for many years. And she leans over to me and says, well, people had come up to me asking me, oh, Lisa, I saw you on TV, or I had heard about this, or my church is praying for Charlottesville. That was just awful. What happened? And I was told that an announcement had been made, not in my presence, but an announcement had been made that Charlottesville was not to be discussed. And you might think that, oh, they were doing this because they wanted to spare my feelings. They didn't want to bring up something that I might have been struggling with. But that's only because you don't know these people. They had no interest in what was happening with me. They were much more concerned about their own comfort. And so I was just rather shocked by it. I was like, well, I did not come here to discuss this topic with you all. You are not the target audience for me to process this with. So I had no intention of doing that. But what became most obvious to me was a few weeks later, after that event had transpired, after I packed up and put my things in the car and said goodbye to the organizer. She did not look at me. She did not speak to me. And about 3 to 4 weeks later, I received this envelope in the mail. And when I opened the envelope, it was my check that I had written for the next year's event. My check had been sent back. Now, Ms. Max, my dumb self, I thought, well, maybe the event has been canceled. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe it's been canceled. And so I contacted the table mate that I had for many years. And I asked, I said, well, do you know if the event for March has been canceled? And she was like, no, I don't think it's been canceled. But if you your check back, that's probably because you broke the rules. And the rule was that Charlottesville was not to be discussed, and you discussed it. I don't think she's prejudiced or anything. I just think that it was a rule and you discussed it. When I tell y'all, listen, I was so hurt
Mm-hmm.
So I'm already coming on the heels of surviving a white supremacist terror attack, coming on the heels of a lot of very heavy organizing with meetings and plans and presentations and, you know, just in a lot of media work for co-founding the Media Collective to connect. I mean, it was just a lot of work that I was doing as I saw it in the name of assuring Black freedom. That was my goal. That was why I participated, so that my kids would not have to be out in these streets. Let me do it now so you don't have to do it later. That is what I thought the whole time. And I was so crushed. I was so sad. I felt like I had survived this terrible thing and now I had lost something that was important to me. And then after I stopped being sad,
then you got
before sad, but anger is eventual, but after the sadness, embarrassment. I was embarrassed. I was like, who did they think I was all this time that I was palatable for them until I spoke up specifically about valuing the lives of my children. And after that embarrassment, and I was like, they never saw they never saw me for who I actually was. And then that's when I shifted to the anger. I was like, I bet these people are right now using me as an example in some argument that they're not racist. I'm not racist because I know this professor and I've been knowing her for years. And you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. You know, they're always pulling these magical Negroes out of their back pockets for any argument. And so I thought, and that's when I decided I was hurt, I was wounded, and I wanted a space. And so I decided right then and there, I said, never again would I audition my humanity in exchange for doing something I loved.
And before that time, you never felt like this was a very superficial relationship or engagement, or that you were being tolerated and these people weren't actually your friends?
I love that question because our relationship was very provisional. These are people that I saw once a year for 15 years. We would spend a long weekend together. We would be quilting. We would be talking. And the nature of this kind of gathering is not just about the sewing. It's a lot about the kind of community building that happens in the space itself. So we might have conversations around like our kids, and there were indeed times often where microaggressions would happen. This was something that I was just like, well, it was an extension. It felt like an extension of just all the other stuff I was doing, which was like working at a predominantly white institution, living in a predominantly white city. And I knew that it was conditional. I knew that these weren't folks that I would go and have lunch with or invite to the house. It wasn't that we had a close relationship beyond this particular event. But what I didn't realize was the actual hostility that was hiding behind their apathy / politeness.
And you may have mentioned this, but you were the only person of color in the group?
I was always the only Black person and always the youngest person, even when I wasn't young. And so that made for another kind of distance, I think. But, we all came through the love of craft. It was because we all loved this particular thing. And I was able to connect. And it wasn't until apparently advocating for Black lives was a bridge too far. And that was when I decided that I needed something new. Now, there is a lot of racism in lots of different craft and sewing groups. If you go on Facebook, for example, everyone that I have ever been involved with, that is a predominantly white, craft group has always had something horrible pop off. And, you know, my brother-in-law was telling me this years ago after I had some incident with some terrible person in a craft group. And I'm just like, I just wanted to learn how to make this pattern. I do not know why I have to be exposed to all your toxicity. Go get some therapy and leave us alone.
Right.
But let me ask you this then. You know, because I'm sure you can understand, especially being a businesswoman now, and I'm not sure what preceded, you know, like any business endeavors before Black Women Stitch, but there is a such thing as sort of a safe space, right? And that can be even when we are at our places of employment, or whatever, or it could be a social group, right? You know, such as this, where folks say, look, we want to get away from all of the politics and everything. This group here, let's leave that on the outside, right? So can you sympathize with that? Or do you feel like it was racist? In other words, do you feel like that if something would have happened to one of their white children, do you think the discussion would have happened? Or do you think they really were being fair and neutral?
And, you know, not just that, before you answer, is that when I at least think, I'm no stitcher, but when I think of stitching, you know, that's peaceful and calm and quiet, and everybody's talking like this, you know, like it's a place where we can commune and convene and connect with one another. I mean, for Pete's sake, you're stitching, like metaphorically or symbolically, that means something. Yes, so yeah, I'm really taken aback by the response, but go ahead.
I love this question because this was never an environment where it was leave your politics at the door. So, for example, the person who was responsible for putting together this particular event would often tell the story about how she's a white woman, she would get pulled over by the police for refusing to wear her seatbelt. That was just something she did routinely. And she would tell the officer, just give me my damn ticket and get out of my face. So so there were moments like that, or things like, oh yeah, I got to make sure I keep my gun in the car, or like it was a completely, the more I, after many years of working with them or talking with them in groups similar, I started to realize that we had some very different social priorities. We had very different lives. And then to have everyone like say, oh, sure, that's exactly how you're supposed to treat the police, but then have no tolerance whatsoever for a Black woman like Sandra Bland, who was essentially murdered for doing the exact same thing. And so there is, I think, Max, you definitely hit on it, that for many people, they want to say that sewing is their happy place and that all of the politics go out the door, nothing else matters. But it's not true.
Yeah.
That is not. Yes, it's just not true. And that for me, when I find this as it occurs in the sewing space, especially quilting, quilters are particularly combative. I don't know what it is, but there is listen, let me tell you, when you said that stitching is supposed to be peaceful, I was thinking, ooh, she's never been to a gift. Because when I tell you those folks, where do you get that from? You shop at Joann's? That's where you get fabric instead of from this place? Oh, you're using that brand? That's what you like. I'm telling you, like, don't let somebody's quilt not be in the show. These quilters have beef going back decades. This is not just silent, peaceful women who are just happy to be running needles through thread. That is not it. That is not it at all. It is incredibly intense. Like if you go to different quilt shows, there's people that will do things like deface the different quilt descriptions, demand that they be taken down. Like
Wow.
there is a lot of politics in the quilt game. And even folks in the sewing industry recognize that is a thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Quilters.
So, the first thing I want to do is actually just applaud you because it says something, I think, about having experienced such a tragedy, and it talks to the beauty that can come out of ashes, so to speak, by you then using that experience and the emotional roller coaster tragedy that you were dealing with to then create from that. And I think it says a lot about you as an individual, but it's innate to us as human beings. But I want to applaud you for that, because there could have been a different response, and you sought one that would help people grow and come together out of that experience. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing that I want to mention is that for many of our listening audience, you didn't describe anything new in terms of your experience with your white counterparts while at this retreat, right? And for others, they may be completely surprised. And I say that to say that we, as Black women, or non-white women, I think males deal with this, but that's a whole different dynamic. But as any non-white woman deals with that whole issue generally, right? I mean, I think that a lot of us walk into spaces where we feel like we may need to we're immediately on guard because we don't know whether or not we are being accepted or tolerated in the space. So let me put up my defenses now, let you know what you ain't gonna do while I'm here, right? Which ain't right, no way to live and be forced to function. Or we operate naively in situations where we think we are part of something that we really aren't. And just the sheer impact, whether we are processing it or not, understand it or not, aware of it or not, that is, I'm not going to call it trauma, but that is,
could be.
That's a thing that we as non-white women have to deal with as part of our lives. It's something that we have to be accepting of. This is how it is for us to exist. And so we figure out how to maneuver through that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or
assimilate, right? Like just blend in because it's the norm.
Yeah.
Or keep your head down. Keep your head down. Keep your head down to get through it. But I think because I do work,
nobody should be forced to live like that.
Yeah.
Agreed. I absolutely agree. And what I see in it and what I am grateful for is I was able to take my own wounding and to create something that was reparative for me and also healing for other Black women. I think one of the things that Black Women Stitch tries to offer is a comfortable, soft place for Black women to land. That I have heard from quite a few folks who they might not have, of course, been in Charlottesville or had the Charlottesville experience, but they have had the experience of thinking that they were part of this community, only to find out when everyone decided to sew a Confederate flag quilt that they really weren't included the whole time, or that there has been that some other form of overt or covert racism or just disregard, being rendered invisible, disposable. Those are the things that Black Women Stitch is never going to do. That this is a circle that starts and ends with us. And one of the things I like to talk about is the ancestral craft of sewing, and how sewing itself, as I like to talk about it, is not just this amazing and wonderful art form, which of course it is, but that it is also a way to access a type of creativity that precedes colonization, mastery, white supremacy. We recall that Audre Lorde says that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've discovered throughout my research and looking at the archaeology of sewing is that the sewing needle is older than the wheel as a tool. And we know how much the wheel helped to advance human history. Right. But thousands upon thousands, the first one that they found was in a cave in South Africa. That's 60,000 years old. They found another sewing needle, that one that looks very much like what we use today. They found that one 40,000 years ago in a cave in Siberia. In China, 30,000 years ago, they found another sewing needle. So what excites me about that is that 30,000 years prehistory, pre-socialization, the ways that humans would move across the earth, pre-domination and war, there were human people who wanted to make clothes for their bodies. Mm-hmm. And what I have noticed in my work on the podcast and talking to people is that when Black women stitch, when we are creating things for ourselves, a form of liberation follows.
Right.
This is what's being enacted, I believe, when Black women stitch. When we stitch clothes, especially for Black plus size women, which is what I've been talking about a lot lately. When Black women are sewing today, we are undermining, we are unraveling centuries of sedimented anti-Blackness, anti-fatness that has been baked into the fashion industry, the garment industry, merchandising about where you can find clothes for plus size people in stores. All of that is something that gets sidestepped when you are making things yourself.
Yeah.
So it's a really great freedom practice. It's an important freedom practice as I see it.
Yeah. You know what that makes me think of, Lisa, is what, and that was so beautifully said, but what makes me think of is how so many things in our history, within Black history, within African American history, that gets taken and it gets even like demonized. Right. And then later down the road, we realized that it was taken and demonized because folks knew the power of it, because they knew that if we knew where we came from and what we started, how empowering that would be. And so you made me think of that as well, because like when you talk about plus size and whatnot, it's like, think about the modeling from decades ago, as you said, and how you're supposed to be the most petite, right? The smallest, all that kind of stuff. And now it's like people are having surgeries to try to look like an African woman.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's those things, how everything comes full circle when things that we're told to feel ashamed about is actually the best things about us.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what's so amazing about that is that and I was talking about this a little bit, when you think about Sarah or Sarjay Bartman, a Black woman who was known for having a very large butt at the turn of the, I think, 1700s into the 1800s. And this woman was exhibited. She was mocked. She was derided. And when she died, the person that had exhibited her, Cuvier, took her remains, like chopped up her actual body and put her buttocks floating in a jar at the museum. I think they call it the Museum of Human, I forgot the English translation, but a French museum had this woman's remains until like 2010 or 28. It was recently that her body was restored to her South African community. And only to have this woman, this Black woman, and her butt being on display. And about 50 years later, the Victorian era, or those folks, start wearing something called the bustle. Mm-hmm. A bustle is something that you would add, like a pillow that you would add to the back of your dress and drape fabric over it. Also, they could have the silhouette of looking like they had a big ass. Yeah. That was the whole point of it. Now they've derided her and exhibited her and shamed her and used this to say, look at the savagery of the African, blah, blah, blah. And then 70 years later, big asses in fashion, and they are creating, by sewing, garments and structures to look like her.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by none other than Lisa Woolfolk, the executive, the CEO of the Black Women Stitch Enterprise. Right? Does that sound good, Lisa?
Listen, y'all, I can tell you, there's folks on my team who know that I have struggled for years to think about Black Women Stitch as a brand.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know.
I've struggled to think about it as a business. I have for the longest thought about it and continue to as a project. And I don't know, and I know it's because of my mistrust of capitalism and what happens when things get turned into businesses, or it feels as though you're no longer committed in the way that you were. But that's my own unlearning that I'm working on as well, because, you know, we can call it whatever it needs to be called in order for it to be sustained.
There you go.
And what I would like this to be is sustained. We have such amazing stories. We have talked with such wonderful artists right here in the Charlottesville community. I have 2 episodes with Sahara Clemens, who is an amazing artist who I know has worked with CIM, and the wonderful work that you all do. And I interviewed Sahara when she was at RISD in her very first year. And then I interviewed her at the end of her time when she was preparing to go to New York. She had just finished New York Fashion Week, and she was preparing to head to Paris for Fashion Week. So to be able to document the story of what her creative journey was from an artist into a fashion designer with formal training, into a fashion designer exhibiting on runways in the most prestigious of shows, has been one of the great blessings of this show. To kind of, we have an archive of over 270 episodes, with talking with so many different amazing people, as well as, you know, interesting projects, histories, and things like that. I think the archive is what I really appreciate and feel is necessary, especially when you see how hard they're working to abolish anything favorable about how we move and create in the world.
That's right.
So I have to ask, do you have any white members?
It's not a membership organization in that way.
Okay.
It is not a membership organization in that way. It is a site for generating, as I see it, gatherings and experiences.
Okay.
It is also fueling the podcast, which is, I think, at this point, our major project. I'm fortunate to say that we have supporters and listeners from all around the world. And in fact, the show has been heard in 83% of the world's countries. There's people that are listening in China. There's people that are listening in Japan. There's people that are listening in Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, folks listening in Spain, folks, you know, in England and Ireland. So Canada is also a top. One of my favorite ones is Australia and New Zealand, and some of those folks have been so cool enough as to write me and send notes and say, "Hey, I just love what you're doing. Thanks so much. I've just been learning so much." So I think it's important that what this project is doing is centering Black women, girls, and femmes. It is centering us because we deserve to be the beginning. We deserve to not be an afterthought. And this is why I've always said, I don't see Black Women Stitch as a DEI project. I'm not trying to get a seat at anyone's table. This is our table. This is the table. We are the table. We set it up. We decide what's going to happen next. And so that's what I have been working toward. And so it is not deliberately excluding anyone. It is instead making a choice to concentrate on what I guess one could say is underrepresented folks, but I don't see us as underrepresented. I see us as life. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family of Black folks who loved and liked other Black people. So I think that there are many folks, unfortunately, who see something as Black and they see it as lesser. They see it as not as good as, and that is not. I don't have that. I don't have that at all. And in fact, I think I have the opposite view, that there is a difference between all are welcome here and this was created with you in mind.
I like that. And Lisa, let me throw this at you, because you mentioned the diversity.
Is it money? You finna throw some money at me? You can put it in the fundraiser at www.stitchbetterhavemymoney.org.
Right, before you ask that question, I just want to make a comment about what you just said, Lisa. Like, I have to say that I do think that for those very reasons, because of the experience of the Black woman, we are much more supportive and open and accepting, and have a lot more empathy and sympathy. There's exceptions to the rule, but for individuals. And I think others, non-Black people, recognize that in us, which is one of the things that gravitates them to different spaces that we hold. And so when you talk about the different nationalities who are in some way connected to your organization, it makes sense. Because they know that about us.
Yes. And I think, and I guess I'd want to kind of ask as well, I feel like Black women have a certain degree of what one might call radical hospitality. Does that make sense to you?
Perfect sense.
And I think
some people may not like that. There are Black women who don't like that.
Yes.
But no, it makes perfect sense.
Yes. And so I think what I am trying to do and what I try to model for others is that it is okay for us to choose ourselves. It is okay to choose ourselves and to choose each other. And this does not mean that we are, don't want or don't like or are hostile to other folks. It's just that for me, it has been an essential healing space to be able to turn to other Black women who are interested in being in community with Black women. And so I called it Black Women Stitch when I could have called it anything. But I was trying to offer a healing space, an invitation for us to examine our creative capacities and to extend the benefit of those to ourselves. And I think that there's something useful about that. I think there's something healing about that. And that is something that I have been really excited about to kind of work on as Black Women Stitch continues to grow.
Yes.
Awesome.
Sorry, Charles.
Thank you. No, you good. It's good convo. We are joined by Lisa Woolfolk of Black Women Stitch. So, Lisa, here's what I'm thinking, because another common thread that we've been discussing.
A thread. Lisa, I love that.
That we've been discussing a lot. So it's been running through our show and sort of the themes for these interviews. Even here in Women's History Month, celebrating that, we know that during the current political climate, right? And again, as you mentioned earlier, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I like saying it out because I want people to know that are against it. I want them to say it out loud what they're against, right? Because the letters don't do it justice. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? When we think about the bare necessities of life, right? Talk about food, clothing, shelter, arguably the top three.
Yes.
So we've had, black farmers on, and as I was talking to you even before this interview, such as yourself, the sustainability of being able to clothe ourselves, the sustainability to be able to, to master this craft. So can you talk a little bit about that, about the, just the raw importance of us supporting not just Black clothing brands, but let's say that the ultimate happens that's being tossed out there of like, we may have blackouts, like we may have to get off the grid and we can't order, so we may need to know who's in our community, who's reachable, that, that can provide this type of necessity. So can you talk about that, about the importance of what you do?
I really appreciate that, because I think something that gets lost all the time is that everything you are wearing right now was made by someone. Everything you're wearing was made by someone. And my rejoinder is always, why not you? Why not you? Why are you not the one? And I think it's because I have this belief, this kind of radical faith in people's, the innate power of human capacity. I really do believe that anybody can make anything. I have made things from shoes, umbrellas, raincoats, baby clothes, quilts, I have absolutely done it. And I think that others can do it too. I also believe that this can be a way to reduce some of the harms that come with fast fashion, with buying, the clothing hauls that people get, and they get them in hauls, like, a bag of here's 10 outfits, and it costs me, I don't shop, so I don't know, $50. I don't know how much things cost. But I do know that it takes about, I think, 100 gallons of water to make a t-shirt. And that our current approach to hyper consumerism of buying, the way that Shein, for example, has 1,000 styles a month or something, that one is always meant to be in the process of buying something. And the people that are making it are people that are in the global South, people that are exploited, people that are essentially, in some ways, I remember reading that the Haitian workers in Haiti who sew, I'm not going to say the brand, but sew this particular underwear brand, were making 60 cents a day. And they wanted more money. They wanted to strike for more money. But then the U.S. stepped in and said, no, you may not strike. You may not, this 60 cents you are getting paid to make these underwear is all you deserve. And so there's a lot of geopolitics, a lot of things that happen where other people around the world are being harmed so we can have cheap goods. And that is untenable. That cannot last forever. And so I think there's a lot of ways, as you were saying, Charles, that with the diversity, it just feels so shameful, truly, to say that I live in an America that explicitly hates diversity, explicitly hates, what was the other one? Diversity. Equity. An America that hates equity, an America that hates inclusion, and that we have a governor who says that this is restoring us back to the that by eliminating these departments at the University of Virginia, for example, is restoring Jeffersonian values. I'm like, oh, really? That's what we're interested in? So everyone gets to impregnate a 13-year-old now? Is that what we're doing? So. If these the values we're gonna get back to, do I get to own 605 people throughout the course of my lifetime? Is that something I get to do as well? And even Jefferson himself, this person, wrote this in a letter to a friend. He said this about slavery. He said, he says, I tremble for my country when I remember that God is just and that his justice will not sleep forever.
That's a whole sermon.
And I tremble for my country when I remember this, because there is no aspect of the Almighty who would side with us in such a conflict. He was saying that he knew Thomas Jefferson knew that God did not side with the enslaver. There is no aspect of the Almighty who could side with us in such a conflict. This man knew that what he was doing was wrong while he was doing it.
That's right.
And yet, somehow the real problem is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And another thing that I love to say out loud is it's important to make this plain. What it is trying to authorize is the idea that we are all meant to get accustomed to white men being the top of all things at all times. That is what we're meant to be accustomed to. So it's somehow telling the lie that for every excellent Black person who is good at their job, who is amazing on the microphone, who is well studied, who gets an amazing LSAT score, there is a white person out there that is better. That is what it is saying. And we know that is just an utter lie. It is a total lie. Just statistically speaking, it is a lie. Yeah, they're not going to play him. I said, look, you can lie to yourself, but I'm not going to let you lie to me.
Yeah. You said, don't play in my face.
Sorry. No, thank you. I'm not interested.
That's right. So we are joined by Lisa Woolfolk of Black Women Stitch. And Lisa, we're going to have to go ahead and get on your calendar to have you back in not too long, because we are up against the hour. But definitely want you to let folks know, because we mentioned sort of the different spinoffs of Black Women Stitch. But go ahead and let folks know, the different entities and like how they can follow it, how they can learn more about it, how they can donate to Stitch Better Have My Money.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank you both so much for this really stimulating conversation. I am honored by both of your voices, and thank you for thinking of Black Women Stitch and the Stitch Please podcast. So the Stitch Please podcast can be found wherever you get your podcasts. We were recently featured in February by Apple Podcasts. So we were at the top of the browse page for 10 days, and that was really lovely. Nice. You can find us also on, we apparently are an Alexa skill. So if you ask your spy bot to play the Stitch Please podcast, it will. It's also, you can find it Pandora, Audible, etc. You can also join up if you go to blackwomenstitch.org. Thank you for sharing the link in the comments. You can sign up for our newsletter. The Stitch Please podcast has over 270 episodes in our archive, and we have recently shifted to an episode every other week rather than every week. So I could write a book called Black Women Stitch Liberation, which is what I'm working on right now. And if folks are interested, there are links to a talk I'll be giving tomorrow at Wellesley College, talking about this research and talking about the really liberatory elements of plus size Black women sewing and what that means for the sewing industry and creativity more broadly. So thank you again for this beautiful opportunity. I'm so honored, and I hope I did good enough to be invited back, because I totally want to come back.
You're doing it, girl. You will definitely be back.
You know that, Ms. Max?
Yeah, no, thank you. Wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I can't wait to have you back. I had no idea that talking about stitching could be so enlightening and inspiring and lively, right? So again, thank you for everything that you're doing. We appreciate you. We do hope you'll come back. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.